And welcome back to sort of the Clear Jits podcast. We host Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Well, Michael, on Friday we did a podcast with Thomas Morstead, but the beginning of that we were just giving our initial thoughts to some of the moves that the Jets have made in free agency. And I think I asked you, like, right at the end of that, before we got into the Morstead interview, I said, by the end of the weekend, is Tyron Smith or Mike Williams a New York Jet? And we both kind of felt like, just the way that they've been spending, maybe they won't even get one of them. But alas, Michael, here we are Tuesday night. The Jets have landed not only Tyron Smith, but now they have Mike Williams, both on one-year deals, incentive heavy for Tyron Smith. I would imagine the same will be for Mike Williams. And here we are, Michael, a week after Jets fans were ready to kill Joe Douglas for being asleep at the wheel. They're now building him a statue. Yet again, the New York Jets are offseason champs. So with all that said, Michael, how you doing?
I'm hyped. I mean, I said it, I think, when I went on Joe Blewett's show a couple days ago, which the Tyron Smith news broke a couple hours after that. So at that point, it was still up in the air. We didn't really know what the splash signings were going to be, when they were going to come, if they were going to come. But now we're here, and not only did they land a big-time offensive lineman, but they get as good of a wide receiver, too, next to Garrett Wilson as you could realistically hope for. So I'm over the moon right now. I think they've really squashed a lot of the concerns that I had coming into this offseason in terms of, like, are they going to be complacent? Are they too over reliant on Rodgers? Are they going to take some of these issues seriously? And with the way they've approached it in this past week, especially with these past two signings, they absolutely have. So I'm absolutely hyped about what the Jets have done.
All right, let's start with the newest signing, and then we'll work our way backward. Because on Friday, that Morstead pod, we were really just going to do the interview, and they're like, "Well, we haven't done anything on what the moves they'd made." So we did like a brief thing on John Simpson and Morgan Moses, but we'll start with Williams, and then we're going to work our way backwards through free agency, and then we'll get out of here. So it should be a bit of a longer pod. Let's start with Mike Williams. I mean, first, how do you think he fits into this offense? Because when I watch him, the guy that I kept seeing when I was watching him, and maybe this is just Jets bias, but I was seeing a lot of Brandon Marshall. I mean, certainly his high point catchability. And then when you just think about like how he would pair with a guy like Garrett Wilson, because you said on our free agency preview pod, like the two things that they really need, one of them was a deep threat, and the other one was somebody who can help Garrett Wilson out in man coverage. When the Jets are on third downs, teams were able to shade help to Garrett Wilson and were able to man up the other Jets receivers and lock them all down. And there was so much pressure on Garrett Wilson to get open. So they needed to find somebody. We thought it might be two different receivers. One would be somebody who can stretch the field, get open deep, and the other would be to take pressure off of Garrett Wilson in man coverage situations. And I think with Mike Williams, you get both of those. And I'm fascinated to see what he looks like if he can stay healthy with Aaron Rodgers opposite Garrett Wilson, high pointing some of those deep balls, those red zone contested catch situations. So when you watch Mike Williams, who do you see, and how do you think he fits into this Jets offense?
Well, you brought up the Brandon Marshall comparison to me earlier. I think even before they officially signed him, you brought that up. And I agreed. I had just been watching some of him before that. I was watching the games he played this year. And he only played 3 games, but the last
it
game
wasn't a
hurt,
Just Bombs. It wasn't a Just Bombs
it was
Productions
not.
YouTube video.
I had the film on. I had all 22. So no Just Bombs Productions. I watched incompletions as well as completions. I can't guarantee I'm going to do that beyond the draft for the draft prospects. I might have to go down the Just Bombs rabbit hole to cover everybody, just because there's so many players.
You can find good cut-ups on YouTube.
The main guys will get good cut ups, but once we start,
once you get into day two,
once you get into day two, it's like Just Bombs. Like, how's that song go? I'm not gonna try to sing it, but there's like that classic Just Bombs production song.
This for like, all the
Discount
cats
Drake. This for all the cats I was balling with or whatever. Yeah. Classic. Can't wait. That's the next 5 weeks. But yeah. Oh yeah, Brandon Marshall. So I do see that, because obviously it's a easy comparison because of the size, but I see a lot of the things that made Brandon Marshall so good in that 2015 season for the Jets. And the biggest thing is maximizing that size. A lot of guys have it, but they don't maximize it. But Brandon Marshall did. Yeah, so hopefully he can learn a little something. But as you said, I think he'll be better. Like it wasn't a great value signing when they got him, and they overplayed or they asked too much of him in terms of his role. But he was never close to that bad. He's due to rebound, especially if Rodgers plays. But nonetheless,
And
Mike
he'll be
Williams,
back in that receiver 3, receiver 4 role, which
right,
is where he
right,
did
right
well in
back into
Green
that
Bay.
role where it's like he's getting used at the level he should be used instead of receiver 2. But anyway, Mike Williams makes the most of that size. He's a hands catcher, extends to the ball, makes the most of the catch radius that he has because that's the thing I think that makes Alan Lazard not as big as he's listed. He's not a hands catcher. He's a big time body catcher. He lets the ball come to him. So when you're doing that, it doesn't matter how tall you are or how long your arms are if you just let the ball come right to you. But when you have the length and you're using it and you could stab the ball, high point it, do all these things, that's what makes you a big catch radius target. And you really see it with Mike Williams. And it's at all parts of the field. I think he's a good field stretcher. You see it in his yards per reception, his deep receiving numbers, all that. He is a big play guy. But even like some of the film I was watching, there were, if they would give him a 10-yard cushion, I saw a few plays where he'll run like a little 5 to 7 yard stop or curl route, and they'll just throw it to him for a nice first down gain, or if it's second, third, and short. And if that play ends up getting contested, he's able to extend to that ball and make those catches. And that's another thing Brandon Marshall did really well in 2015. It feels like a lot of his feasting was just those quick hitting throws because they were so afraid of him getting over the middle, making big plays. They gave him cushion a lot of the time, and he made catches like that. And I saw Mike Williams doing a good bit of that. So he makes the most of his size. He gives the Jets that big time catch radius threat that they didn't really have. And then in addition to that, I think he's a field stretcher. Maybe not in the traditional burner sense, but he has good speed for his size. And he's so good in those contested situations that he doesn't even necessarily have to blow by you to be a threat on a deep throw. So he still commands that respect down the field that I think will help open things up for Garrett Wilson. And then I think he fights for yak with the ball. He's not a guy you're going to throw a lot of screens to or anything, but he's tough with the ball in his hands, has a little bit of athleticism. So overall, I think, like I said, realistically, I don't know if there's a wide receiver 2 target you can get who's better than him. Obviously, there are receivers who are better, but you're not
Especially
always
for the price.
exactly because you're not going to always get like 2 bona fide number 1 guys on the same team. But Mike Williams, over the last 3 years, is 12th among receivers in receiving yards per game with 72. So, and he averages about, per 17 games, he gives you about 7 touchdowns, 1,200 yards. Obviously, the key is staying healthy, but the numbers that he puts up, putting that next to Garrett Wilson, and he's already proven that he could, do that going off of a number 1 guy, playing next to Keenan Allen in Los Angeles, who is, I think, a pretty, different. Obviously, at this stage, Keenan Allen is not the same as Garrett Wilson, but I think Garrett Wilson can get his production in a similar way to Keenan Allen, if you know what I mean. He's a high target guy, great separator,
Right.
really feasts like short to intermediate. I think Garrett Wilson could do a lot of that. So Mike Williams has already shown what he can do off of that type of player who has that number 1 target role. So I think he's like we were talking about Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Deontay Johnson, all these guys who are good players in their own right. But Mike Williams is, I think, better than just about, other than Mike Evans, I think Mike Williams is better than every other player we were talking about. And they got him without trading on a 1-year deal that is, like, Jerry Jeudy just got $41 million guaranteed. Almost
I was
20
worried
years.
because that was announced in the middle of
Yeah.
his visit, and I was worried that was going to affect things because I felt like the Jets were going to close it. I felt like the Jets were going to close it. I even thought on Friday when we did that pod, I was like, I think they'll be in on Mike Williams just because he's such a good compliment to Garrett Wilson. There's all those rumors that they really wanted him during the 2022 free agency. I thought he'd be the perfect type of receiver for a guy like Aaron Rodgers, just because I think Aaron Rodgers' ball placement might be his best skill and his best attribute. And so when you have a guy like Mike Williams who is so aggressive at the catch point, in the red zone, on those deep throws, I think you're going to see Mike Williams have a number of top tier catches this season if he can stay healthy. That's obviously the big question mark, which is part of the reason the Jets were able to get him for this price.
Right.
I will say I do think some of the health concerns are a little overblown. I know he had like a back thing coming out of college, so I think his whole career has kind of been like, how long can he stay healthy? He's also, he's going to be 30 this year. But he tore his ACL in week 3 last year. The year before that, he played 13 games, missed 4, and then a playoff game. Before that was 16 games, 15 games, 15 games, 16 games, and then 10 his rookie year. So it's not like, and we'll get to the next guy, Tyron Smith, who's been a lot more of an injury history, or even some of the other guys we were talking about in free agency. It's like, it's definitely a concern. coming off the ACL, we'll see how he looks. Although he's not necessarily the type of receiver like a Garrett. Well, I don't even want to put that. Well, whatever. Like a Garrett Wilson type of receiver, if he's come or an OBJ or somebody like that, those types of receivers, those types of route runners and explosive speed threats, tearing their ACLs would be a lot more concerning to me than a bigger body receiver like Mike. I don't know if you feel similarly, but like
Yeah.
assuming his rehab's gone well, you'd imagine he took a physical. The way that athletes recover from ACLs these days, I don't think it should be a huge thing. Although, yeah, he's hitting 30. He has missed a number of games throughout his career. He is coming off that ACL, but with his style of play, because he's not too much of a separator in the traditional sense, and he usually wins with his physicality and how he can win at the catch point and his hands, I don't think it should be too much of an issue, especially when you have a number one receiver opposite him and a Hall of Fame quarterback with elite ball placement throwing the ball to him. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And we talked about Brandon Marshall being a comparison. He was 31 when he came to the Jets, and obviously he was still at his absolute peak at that point. And he quickly fell off after that. But Jets only have Mike Williams on a 1-year deal. So yeah, I agree with the injury concerns being overblown in the sense that, like, I think a lot of people are treating him the same as Tyron Smith, which, Tyron Smith, it's very legitimate. I mean, every year for almost a decade, it's been at least 3 games a year. So with him, it's, severe, about as severe as it gets in terms of consistency of injuries.
Outside of Bakhtiari.
Outside of Bakhtiari, which is a whole nother level. But with Mike Williams, like you said, I mean, ACL this year, but before that, you look at the last 5 years, 13, 16, 15, 15, 16. Rookie year, he had 10. There was the back issue. But overall, I mean, that's pretty typical. I think in general, people have too high of standards for NFL player durability. It's like, who's this Iron Man receiver you want to get instead? Is it Corey Davis? No. Is it Odell Beckham? No. It's like everyone has some degree of injury issues. So I think that's what, makes these two moves such perfect opportunities for the Jets, Mike Williams and Tyron Smith, is these injury issues. Like, yes, it's a concern. The season could be over before week 1 arrives. I'm not even going to do like the superstitious stuff because, like I said, how many times did we say knock on wood last year with Rodgers and all that? It didn't work. So I'm going to talk about whatever terrible doomsday scenario I want, and it's not a
I think it's because
no
we were probably on an even. I think it's because we were on an even number of knock on wood, so it canceled each other out. You see what I'm saying? You had to end on an odd number.
It's got to be odd,
right?
Or else they just keep canceling.
Exactly.
I got it. So maybe we should keep track of that. But
yeah,
I mean, like the injury concerns are real for sure, 100%. But if these guys weren't injury prone, Tyron Smith right now would be on a $125 million deal in Dallas. Mike Williams would still be a Charger. They're out here because they have these concerns. But for a Jets team that's all in, trying to maximize this window with Aaron Rodgers, it's the perfect opportunity because if it does break your way and they do stay healthy, look at this team on paper. It's insane because of these 2 additions. I mean, like you take what the hope we already had going into last year, and now that team looks like borderline pathetic, that offensive depth chart compared to what it does right now with an elite left tackle, high-end wide receiver too, Mike Williams. And this opportunity is there because of their injury concerns. So it's high risk. These are high risk, high reward moves. But for the position the Jets are in, they've already restructured so many deals, traded picks, invested in a veteran quarterback. You're all in. So make the highest upside moves. I would much rather see them do this than like, okay, we got a durable, like I still would have liked Tyler Boyd. We put some praise on him. But like, okay, Tyler Boyd doesn't really miss games, but like, where's the ceiling that you're getting with that? With these types of players, it's like, if it breaks your way, you have a supremely talented offense. So I really appreciate these moves.
If it doesn't, the risk, especially on the Tyron Smith contract, I mean, we'll see with the Mike Williams one, but even the fact that it's worded as up to 15, I mean, worst case scenario, he's getting paid what Allen Lazard's getting paid, right? And it might even be even less, tied to the games that he plays. They're both on 1-year deals, and that's amazing because next offseason, both Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, Breece Hall, all those guys are going to be up for extensions. Now, I would imagine the Jets might not do it until the following offseason. They'll probably pick up the 5th-year option. But just the Jets have a number of contract extensions coming that are in the pipeline from that 2022 class. And so the Jets didn't have to sacrifice their ability to re-sign some of those guys, although that's a conversation for another day about if they'll have to sacrifice Brees, whatever. But at least in the short term, they didn't have to sacrifice their long-term cap flexibility. Rodgers has said he's been pretty vocal. He wants to play 2, 3. He's even floated out 4 more years. And I don't doubt that he can at least get 2 years of prime Aaron Rodgers and perhaps beyond that. And like you said, if things break the Jets' way, which they inevitably won't break the Jets' way, but just on paper, and not even just on paper right now, it's the flexibility they've allowed themselves in the draft class. They don't have to be penciled in to starting a rookie taking a rookie offensive tackle at 10 and taking him. They don't have to get a receiver. They really can go into pick 10 at the draft, best player available. And I think right now, when you look at this depth chart, a trade down would be the optimal scenario. Pick up another second round pick, recoup the one that you lost from the Rodgers trade. But you have to have a dance partner. So it's going to come down to a quarterback falling or a team trading up for a top defensive player or who knows? Who knows how draft night will exactly play out? We can talk about that a little bit towards the end of the pod. The next few weeks will all be draft talk, but they've done a nice job of patching up all the holes with the first part of the week and trading Morgan Moses and signing John Simpson, getting 2 stars in the offensive line for fairly cheap. I mean, combined, their price is what Lake and Tomlinson would have been. I mean, just
Right.
between Lake and Tomlinson and CJ Uzomah, I think you covered both of those contracts. I think they did a great job patching up those holes. And then with these Mike Williams and Tyron Smith additions, not only do you patch up the holes, but you just give the Jets that high ceiling. And it's like, look, if Tyron Smith misses, 7 games and Mike Williams misses 5, that would suck. But I do believe in the Jets roster as a whole that if Rodgers can stay healthy, they can get to the playoffs. And then who knows? Maybe Tyron Smith's healthy for the divisional game. And that's the difference between advancing to, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but that's the difference between winning a playoff game and not. So these signings to me, very exciting. It does go to show, though, that you can't overreact to the first couple of days of free agency, especially the first day of free agency, because I saw a lot of people on Twitter ready to kill Joe Douglas. And it was like hour 3 of the legal tampering period. And it was just like, all right, let's calm down. And I think a lot of that had to do with not being able to re-sign Bryce Huff, which, you look at, it's like, would you rather re-sign Bryce Huff, who was a homegrown, undrafted free agent, one of the best passers in football, and I believe that he's going to continue to develop into one of the best edge rushers as a whole in football, or would you rather take his resources in that contract and turn it into Mike Williams and Tyron Smith, get Aaron Rodgers a blindside protector, and get Garrett Wilson the number 2 receiver? I don't think I'm sorry. I love Bryce Huff. It's a tough decision, but I think it was one that they had to make. So not saying that Joe Douglas deserves all the good will and faith in him in the world, considering the last couple of years and his record as a GM, but man, I mean, he was getting crucified like hour 5, and it's like, all right, let's just see what happens. And he's done. I think so far you have to say it's been a home run of a free agency period for the Jets. Anything else on Mike Williams before we move to Tyron Smith, who I'm very excited to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think you and I were. I mean, I want to speak for you, but I'll speak for myself. I was definitely, I want to say critical, but I was kind of confused about why they didn't make some of the wide receiver moves that were out
I
there.
was
Whether
stoked.
it's Keenan Allen getting traded for the 4th, Deontay Johnson. Like, I was just seeing some of these moves go off the board, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to bury them until this is all said and done. Like, that's why we didn't come on the podcast last time and say too much, because we knew there were more moves to come, and we wanted to see the whole picture before we commented on it. So I definitely wasn't at the point of like most Jets fans where it was, I was burying him. I was just starting to get a little tense where it's like, okay, like there's still an opportunity to make this work, but the options are dwindling. So I'm just, minorly curious about what the plan is. But as it turns out, pretty much the last 2 options that, could have been seen as big ticket additions, they ended up getting both of them. So
Yeah.
they did have a plan all along. So this is something we should take note of for next year, which is just like, let's not get 5 hours into day 1 of free agency and be like, what is going on here? Why have they not signed anyone? Like, let's let it play out and judge it when the whole picture is there to be evaluated.
I'm excited to watch a lot more of Mike Williams, and obviously we'll have Joe Blewett on the pod sometime in the next couple weeks because we have a lot of draft stuff and free agency stuff to talk about him. Because I'm interested to get both your thoughts on watching Mike Williams film and what he could fully bring to this offense. But at the very least, the Jets have a big bodied physical receiver who can make contested catches, can help out in the red zone. It's going to complement Garrett Wilson well. It's going to take off some pressure in man coverage. And I think with a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, could make some ridiculous plays for this team this year. I guess last thing on Mike Williams is what number do you think he should wear? We got 81, his regular number.
Yeah,
he
you
could
put
go
out
back
the
to his
poll.
college number.
I
Go back
voted
to his
number
college number,
81.
number 7. You want 81? He could also go to 0. He could be the Jets' first. I mean, I guess that Adrian Amos
I think
last year.
the 80s are, receivers in the 80s are becoming a little too rare. I think we need to bring that back a little bit. Like so many classic great receivers in the 80s, Jerry Rice, Michael Irvin, a lot of Corey Davis, a lot of legends have been in the 80s. So I think we need to start bringing that back. And Mike Williams already was repping that. It looked good on him. I think it's going to look really good because in the previous Jets uniforms, I don't think it looked that great. Like, who's worn 81? I know Quincy
Zach
Newton
Kuntz.
did for like one game. Zach Kuntz. It had that, it's just a vertical line, the 1. So if we still had those uniforms, maybe I would lean towards something else. 7's pretty cool, but in the classic number font,
0?
81.
0?
We already got Garrett.
It gives Rodgers a moving target when he's coming across the middle on a crossing route. He's got a breadbasket to aim for.
81, it's 2 digits. It's easier for him to register. It's just more surface area of number.
Right, well, we'll see. Just the important things in this podcast. Let's talk about Tyron Smith. Obviously, the injury issues are there, and it's a big part of the reason why I do think the Jets should still take an offensive tackle. I mean, again, we say it every year. Don't go into the draft with a shopping list. They should take the best player available. Maybe one of the top receivers falls. Maybe a Neighbors is there. I don't think Marvin Harrison Jr. is there, but maybe that would create more of a discussion. I do think ultimately the best player on the board is going to be an offensive tackle or Brock Bowers. But I just think when you look at this Jets team that they have on paper, the one thing that could sink them is injuries on the offensive line. And we've seen it. And Tyron Smith is fantastic when he's out there. But the big question is going to be, is he going to be out there? I mean, Dallas didn't even have him practicing outside of the walkthrough last year, and he played 13 games, which was his most for a couple seasons before that. But still only 13 games. It's he's going to miss some time. So that offensive tackle number 3 is going to play. They could go the free agency route. They could go try to bring back. They could try to bring in David Bakhtiari, Rodgers' buddy, but he's a complete wild card in his own right. So I guess we can call it on the draft stuff, but I do think that Tyron Smith I'm so excited about this signing and when he's going to be out there, the Jets are going to have a top 3 left tackle in football. I mean, I'd really say Trent Williams is above him, but I don't know who else is above Tyron Smith when he's out there. But I don't think this precludes the Jets from taking a tackle. That's a conversation for another day. But when you watch Tyron Smith with those long arms and those giant paws and in pass protection, and especially how the Jets are evolving, or we imagine they're going to evolve their blocking scheme, what jumped out to you when they signed him? And just kind of take us through your reaction to the Jets signing Tyron Smith. Because it happened, like you said, it happened after our podcast on Friday, and then it happened after like a 2-hour live stream with Joe Blewett. So what was your reaction to the Tyron Smith signing?
Well, I know you remember, but my first reaction was calling you like it was some major life event. Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
I was at a bar. I was like, oh, what?
Like, what's some major life event that would prompt you to call someone? Something positive.
Yeah, something not negative.
I got a new car. I don't know.
I don't think
something
that,
major enough to warrant me calling.
Got a job offer, something like that.
I got a job that I had interviewed for, gone through 3 rounds of interviews, and I got it.
Right.
No, we signed Tyron Smith, a giant man to push other giant men around. That's what we got. But no, on the field, I think it's as perfect of an offensive line addition as you could have had. I mean, especially compared to the market, because like it was just not a great free agent offensive line market. But even if if the Jets had to win one game today, screw his age, the contract, injuries, any of that, Tyron Smith is one of those 2 tackles. Like you said, maybe Trent Williams is your other tackle. Put one of them, one of them has to switch sides, whatever. But he's as good as it gets when he's healthy. And I know he's 33 years old, going on 34, but he was still playing at probably the level of the best left tackle in the league this year, especially in pass protection. I mean, he's just as technically sound as it gets in pass protection. I mean, you see him so often do that snatch trap technique. That's a big fixture in his highlights where he's able to, the rusher gets extended, he slaps his arms down, and now that guy's in the ground, he can't do anything. You rare other guys do it, but it's pretty rare. It would be one of their best highlights of the season on their highlight tape, but he just does it constantly. I watched a couple of games from him, especially against the Niners, and just he does it multiple times a quarter where he's just not only shutting the rusher down, but he's pancaking him, which you don't see in pass protection a lot. So his technique, his hands, his footwork are all just pristine to go with the athleticism and the length. In pass protection, he's probably the most valuable pass protector in the league when you consider the value of playing left tackle and that the fact that he was the best last year and he's been doing it for a long time. So yeah, it's really exciting. And then in the run game, he's another guy who I think fits into the mold that they started when they signed the two Ravens players. Those two guys coming from a gap scheme, I think he fits into that as well. He's a great athlete and he could do zone as well. But when you look at his pulling, just having another guy who could pull out of his spot, get out in space, and just pick people off when they're in the open field. All five guys in this line now are really good at that. So the Jets are going to be running a lot of plays where they're getting guys pulling, rushing
And
towards the
Rucker,
design gap. And Rucker is a guy you could throw in there who's a really good on-the-move blocker. So I hope that they do this. They'd be stupid not to. We still have to hear them confirm and say that they're going to do it and then see it on the field. But the moves, the three offensive line moves are way too heavily leaning towards that for me to think that they're not going to. So I think he fits into that as well. The pass protection's elite. So
and just
I
for
love this
anybody
move.
who didn't listen to Friday's podcast or read your article, maybe we can talk through that
Yeah.
transition a little bit more because, like you said, they signed John Simpson and then they trade for Morgan Moses, two guys coming from Baltimore, and Baltimore runs that man gap blocking scheme, which is just different from the wide zone that the Jets have run in recent years. And I don't mean to say anything. I think you're going to see more teams go. Look, like the Jets ran man gap principles plenty of times last year as well. I mean, you think of that touchdown run against Denver.
Yep.
That was a play where they had. I think was it Tittman who was pulling, and I think it was Max Mitchell too, or something like that. But one of the biggest runs of the year was a man gap blocking play. But even like you think about McVay, he comes from that Shanahan tree, and typically wide zone running game, and then last year switched to a lot more gap principle.
Yep.
So I think this is something you're going to see throughout the NFL, just to kind of counter how defenses are playing, and we can get into that discussion a little bit more. But can you just kind of explain the transition? And then I guess we can hop into these two Ravens guys and talk about the O-line as a whole.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously the first two additions, both of them come from Baltimore, and they were a very heavy gap power scheme over there, which means more pulling, more down blocks, more getting vertical compared to the Jets, who recently, more so I would say under LaFleur the first 2 years than Hackett this year, because they were pretty balanced. They did a little bit of both. But the Jets have generally been like a wide zone team where it's very lateral. It's about getting sideline to sideline, more so getting in between defenders than really, overpowering them and letting the running back use his vision to pick between the holes. I'd say that's a general way to discern between the two. But by getting both of those Ravens players, I think it would be a mistake to continue being a wide zone leaning team and not kind of move towards power gap running, because that's what those two guys fit. Like Morgan Moses he was solid with the Jets, but he looked a lot better with the Ravens because he's a good fit for that, because his pulling is tremendous. And he's not a bad athlete, but he's not amazing. And the same for John Simpson. And he's a great puller as well. So both those guys are great fits there. I think it would be a mistake to not maximize that by being a very gap-heavy team. And then Joe Tittman and Vera Tucker fitted as well. I think they could fit anything because they're both that talented, but they could fit it. Then Tyron Smith, also another guy is probably talented to do both, but definitely he would be a fit as well. So yeah, I really like the overall vision of the offensive line. So not only do you get the elite talent with Tyron Smith, but I think between the three additions, there's a lot of compatibility with how these guys fit together, how they fit with Tittman and Vera Tucker, and just the overall vision and philosophy that they've kind of crafted with all five of these guys together. It really feels like a cohesive unit with a vision and a mindset, more so than just a bunch of guys thrown together. So that's what excites me the most about it.
How do you feel Tyron Smith is in the run game, and in comparison to kind of what Dallas did? Was Dallas more of a man gap team, or were they more of a wide zone team? Or I mean, there's
I, bel-
different types of zone blocking, but
I believe from what I watched, they were definitely more of a zone team. They did a lot of inside zone, especially from what I remember. But I saw some of both. Like there were opportunities to see him in both concepts, and I do think he is better with gap blocking because like they whenever he pulls, he's really effective. I think getting vertical on double teams, he's really good. Sometimes on zone, he wasn't the most effective, so I do think he does lean towards gap as well, like the other two guys.
I think the other thing that that move kind of signals is that AVT should be penciled in as a guard, because I think when you look at the traits that you're going to value in a zone blocking team, is you want that athleticism, because you want them to be able to get to the spot, the zone that they're going to have to block, and so that's why the Jets were interested in Max Mitchell type of an undersized offensive lineman, who had relatively plus athleticism, or the fact that they could have a guy like AVT who did have the athleticism to get out in space and get to the zone, and or a guy like McGovern who is a little bit undersized as a center, but he can use that. I'm trying to. What's the? Is it a? You talk about it all the time. What's the one technique where he
Reach block,
gets the reach block, where he gets the
yeah,
outside shoulder of the defensive tackle and then kind of just like basically pulls a 180. You need that, the
yeah.
athleticism, and the size isn't as important. But when you look at a man gap offensive line, you want that size and that power and the length. And you look at Tyron Smith. I mean, for God's sakes, he has a knee brace on his arm because they didn't have arm braces that would fit him. When you look how long his arms are and how big his hands are, I don't think AVT is the type of guy that you want to tackle in that type of blocking scheme. Yeah, the injuries with Tyron are concerning. It's going to be on the Jets training staff, not just with him, but to really. I mean, I guess they had a lot of practice this year with Becton. They finally got a year out of Becton where he didn't really miss any time. But I think they should probably stick to the practice schedule that he had in Dallas, which is very, very light. This guy doesn't need too many reps during the week to be sharp on Sundays. He can be out there on the walkthroughs. He can be shadowing the practice, being in the meeting rooms, but this guy doesn't need to be taking reps against Will McDonald on Wednesday, So I think that's going to be key, and that's going to be key with him and Williams, and hell, even Rogers, 40 years old, coming off an Achilles injury. I mean, I think there might be a tendency there to really want to push, just to show everybody, prove everybody wrong and how fast he's recovering. It's like, let's be smart with these veterans. But the other two guys, I mean, we touched on it on Friday and we've touched on it a little bit briefly, but I know after watching John Simpson, you became a pretty big fan of his game,
Yeah.
because he had quite the highlight reel. So what do you make of John Simpson and replacing Laken Tomlinson, which I'll be honest, the bar is pretty low, and he's probably the lowest, or the least acclaimed offensive line addition they've made. But I got to say, you were sending me a lot of clips of John Simpson, and it's getting me pretty excited.
Yeah, I was really impressed, and I don't want to be unrealistic or be too much of a homer and sit here and raise the bar too high when he got, what I think it was 2 years, 12 million. So like the demand for him wasn't super high in a market where guards were getting a lot of money. So I don't want to be unrealistic, but I was watching
He's our new
him
Josh
and
Andrews.
yeah, I remember Josh Andrews. We watched like one game of him against the Steelers, and we are like, this guy is low key pretty good. I think we got a steal here. No, it's a different degree than that because he was just a total random backup. At least Simpson is a starter. But no, I watched a few games of him, especially against better teams. I know I watched the Niners, the Rams, and a couple more in addition to those. And I was really consistently impressed. Like for every free agent I signed, I kind of did a little thing where as soon as I signed them, I was just kind of putting a barrage of clips out there, and my mindset was to put anything I saw, just run through the film. If it's a good play or a bad play, anything noticeable, I'll put it out there. And I went into his Niners and Rams games with that mindset, expecting to see a good amount of both, considering the competition. And there was rarely anything bad to put out there. I think especially I was impressed in pass protection because he had a lot of tremendous one-on-one reps where he held up for a really long time against Aaron Donald, against Javon Hargrave. Good competition. And that's what really impressed me. And there are stats out there to back it up. There was one that Next Gen Stats posted that I believe he had the fourth longest average time to pressure among guards, which tells you that he's holding up for a long time. If it's a long developing pass play, or if receivers aren't getting open, the quarterback has to hold the ball, go through his reads. he's capable of holding up throughout that. And he's not giving up a lot of those quick pressures that destroy plays. And I think that's such an important ability for this Jets team because that's been I was going to say such an Achilles heel, but I think we should ban that
Wow.
phrase from being
Wow.
used. Such
Too soon.
what's an alternative to that? Such a
Weakness.
weakness. There we
Oh,
go. Nice and
yeah.
simple. A huge weakness for this Jets team is those quick pressures. I mean, obviously the best example is the 2019 Seeing Ghost game, but even post that, and throughout the Zach Wilson area, just pressures that destroy the play immediately. We've seen too much of that, whether it's via communication with a blitz or a stunt, or guys just being so bad that they get roasted immediately. It's happened too much, and your quarterback just has no chance if you're giving up quick pressure. But with Simpson, I feel like even if he did lose, it took a long time for it to happen. He had a lot of reps where he showed me I can trust him to hold up on an island for a long time if we need him to. And the numbers were there to back it up too. So he really impressed me in pass protection. That's for sure. And run game too. Like I think he's a little shakier there, but the pass protection I was impressed with. Absolutely.
The big negative to Simpson would be the penalties. Did
Yeah.
you see
Yeah.
any on film that was like, okay, this guy gets a little sloppy? Because that was the one thing I could see is there are a few times where it seems like he can get a little sloppy and start getting over his knees a little bit, and it could lead to him getting a little grabby. Did you see that when watching
Yeah.
him? And what do you attribute some of these penalties to?
Penalties are definitely a concern. He's only had 2 seasons as a full-time starter. He had 11 penalties in both of them. So definitely high penalty. And it seems like just from watching him, I didn't actually watch every single penalty, but I saw a couple of them. And just based on the general trends of his game, I could tell why they're generally happening. His hands are very wide. He has a tendency to, when he's going in for his punch, a lot of times they're outside the frame of the defender. And that'll definitely cause you your fair share of penalties when your hands are, on his back, on his hip. Once the quarterback starts running away, the defender separates from you, you're going to end up grabbing if you don't have your hands inside the chest. And that's something he struggles with. It's probably the most consistent issue I saw. That can hurt you in the run game, can hurt you in the pass game, but it's certainly going to lead to penalties in either phase. So you're going to see penalties from him, and it's probably going to, make it not liked by Jets fans. Kind of the only thing offensive linemen get judged by fans like, oh, you're a penalty machine. You always have killer penalties. Just forget the other 99% of the plays. But so yeah, he's going to commit penalties. It seems
Well, I
pretty
will say I
likely.
don't.
Yeah,
A first down holding penalty won't kill the Jets as much if Aaron Rodgers is back there. It felt like when the Jets had
it
one
shouldn't.
penalty
Yeah,
that set back the drive last year, the drive's over. Like one
yeah.
penalty ruined a whole drive. With Rodgers, it's like, all right, it's more opportunities to throw deep to Mike Williams.
It was under a microscope because anytime we knew if they ever had that type of penalty, it was over. There's no way the Jets are getting 20 yards in a series. But now it's like, okay, can we just get 15 yards, get a 2nd and 5, and keep it moving? So that's good. One thing that you can kind of give him an excuse for is that a quarterback like Lamar Jackson can kind of create some penalties because he's so mobile. A lot of times he'll move the pocket, cause defenders to maybe go to places where the offensive lineman isn't expecting to block. So that potentially could have created some penalties for him. I didn't watch every single one. I saw a few of them, but definitely wide hands is an issue for him to look out for. That holds him back a little bit and creates some of those penalties. But overall, I think at the very least, I'm confident this is a league average starting left guard. And if that's your worst lineman, you're in really good shape.
And then the last free agency addition to the offensive line so far, Morgan Moses, old friend. The thing with this one, and like you said, like the switch from going from a wide zone with the Jets in 2020 and 2021 to going to more of a man gap scheme, which does fit. And we said that when he signed too. We said that, he signed, I think in June, right? It was like late after free agency, after the draft. And Moses was exciting that the Jets got him. But he was kind of an afterthought. And the one thing that you said was like he's not really a scheme fit, and I think you saw that at times with him in 2021. But he gave like an average season. I felt like okay, this guy's a veteran. He's not, he could be on plenty of good starting offensive lines. He wasn't a difference maker. I think in Baltimore he got to shine a little bit more, and then hopefully, like you said, that the Jets making the switch in their blocking scheme, which shouldn't be too presumptive. You should see him shine a lot more as a run blocker. So I'm excited to see him as a run blocker. How do you feel, though, as a pass blocker? Another guy getting up there in age. But that's the one question mark I'd have for Morgan Moses, and I don't know how much you've seen. We have a month here to watch these free agent guys and these draft prospects. But how do you feel like he is as a pass protector, and especially moving from a completely different type of quarterback in Lamar Jackson to a guy in Aaron Rodgers who is not necessarily a pocket passer, but hey, he's 40, coming off an Achilles. He might look a little bit more Brady-ish these next few seasons. So how do you feel like Moses is as a pass blocker?
I mean, I saw a lot of the same things I saw at Simpson. Just a really good job of long developing pass blocking. He was top 5 in that same metric in average time right here. And some of the names he's alongside: Jawan Taylor, Lane Johnson, Darnell Wright, and then he's 4th, and then Tristan Wirfs after him. So you have some good company in that metric, which tells you that it probably is something worth taking into account.
Is that more Lamar Jackson dancing around making plays, or is that Moses holding up in pass protection though?
No, I think him doing that puts more responsibility on the offensive line, but they were legitimately holding up. Like, I don't think the stat is created because, okay, he's buying time, so the play is lasting longer. I think they were earning that because Jackson was challenging them to do that through his playmaking and holding the ball, and they were up to the task. So that's why I think I'm really confident about them translating to this offense, because Aaron Rodgers probably isn't going to do a whole lot of that. Obviously, he can at times, and back in his prime, I think it was more of a fixture of his game. But recent years, Aaron Rodgers, obviously save for one play last year, has gotten the ball out really quickly. And that was really his calling card when he won the previous 2 MVPs, was quick releases. So I don't think they're going to have to do as much of that with the Jets. So the fact that in Baltimore, with Lamar Jackson doing what he does, he holds the ball a long time, they were still able to put up really good numbers in terms of pressures allowed, sacks allowed, all those things. Both of those guys fared very well. I thought the film backed it up. Doing it there, they're going to be able to do it with a team that figures to get the ball out a lot quicker with a veteran quarterback. So I thought he's a solid pass protector as well. And then in the run game, like I said, great polar. He's got power going downhill. Obviously, just not the greatest, never was really the greatest athlete, and especially not now at 33. But if you're playing a gap scheme, I think he's very solid. And I like the pass protection as well. So with him, I think you're getting, like I said, I think Simpson, probably middle of the pack starting left guard. Moses, I think, is slightly above that and above average right tackle. So both additions, I think, especially for the cost that they're going to have on the cap and what the Moses trade was, I think are tremendous values.
All right, without getting too specific on the draft prospects themselves, because the next podcast will start to focus on the draft a little bit more. I've started watching cut ups of different offensive tackles. I haven't really watched much beyond that. But after the Jets patching their main holes in the offensive line, they do have some flexibility in the draft to take a receiver. Brock Bowers is out there, the tight end. They don't necessarily have to land an offensive tackle at 10. How do you feel, though, when you look at this offensive line and then you have a guy in Tyron Smith who is amazing, and I'm very excited to watch him, but he's going to miss some time. And then you have a guy, Mike Williams, who also is very good, but he's had some injury issues as well. What do you think is more important for the Jets in 2024 when you look at this draft pick? And again, it can't be a shopping list. They're going to take the best player available. But when you look at Aaron Rodgers, what's more detrimental to this season? Is Mike Williams going down or Tyron Smith going down? Because that's, I think, a big factor in who they should take here in the draft.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's one of the most exciting parts of making these 2 signings is just how open that first round pick becomes and the number of possibilities, even whether it's trading down or up. But I'm leaning towards offensive line right now, especially because you look long term, and this applies to receiver too. But they don't have anything locked up beyond this year at tackle, so I think that definitely adds to the possibility of drafting a tackle. Because draft picks in general, as much as they're for helping your team right now, it's more so about beyond this year. And the Jets still haven't changed anything about their 2025 offensive tackle depth chart or receiver. Again, this applies there as well. So I don't know. I'm definitely still very torn on it. And once I get deeper into the prospects, maybe I'll have a stronger opinion on which way I'm leaning. But I'm kind of leaning towards offensive line right now, just because protecting Rodgers is the number one priority. And if there were one position, like you asked, which one would be more detrimental if they went down? I think it's Tyron Smith. And I know right
Yeah.
now receiver is dire if you don't have Garrett Wilson, but like as long as if this offensive line is healthy as it's constructed, and I ran some numbers on this, I did an article on it to see where they could rank if they're fully healthy. This is a top 5 to 10 offensive line if it's 100% healthy. So even if you don't have Mike Williams, but you still have Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Tyler Conklin, no matter who else you have a receiver without offensive line, I think you could be successful. But if you start putting in Carter Warren, Max Mitchell at tackle, who knows what could happen, regardless of who your receivers are. So I could go either way right now, but I think I'm leaning towards tackle. Is that what you're kind of thinking?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, and we said every year, it's not a shopping list, and the Jets have done a nice job setting themselves up
Safety.
for it
We're
not
getting
to
to
be
safety.
that. But man, it's you look at not only just for this season, it's the injury issues with Tyron we talked about. You have a Hall of Fame quarterback coming off a torn Achilles who's 40 years old. I think protecting him, here's the benefit to the guy, like a guy like Rodgers, or you saw this with Tom Brady, you saw it with Peyton Manning, is they can get production out wide out of pretty much anybody. Now, you want to surround him with plus playmakers, obviously, and that was part of some of the contention he had in Green Bay, is he felt like they were kind of using that. It's we have Aaron Rodgers, let's just build up the defense, and they weren't giving him enough help. So it's not like you want to completely ignore it, but he has enough playmakers. I don't think you need to spend a round one pick on a receiver. I think you can go get somebody in round 3. To me, it's you have 2 tackles who are only on 1-year deals. Nobody beyond this year. Both of them are in their 30s. One of them has severe injury issues. So it's not even just about this year, because even if Tyron Smith makes it 16 games and he goes down in the second to last game of the season, you don't have him in the playoffs. And it's what, you have Carter Warren coming in, who might end up being something, but it's David Bakhtiari, maybe they bring back Becton. To me, it's you can go secure this offensive line's depth and their future if you take one of these offensive tackles. And besides the fact, it might even just be the best player on the board, honestly, because really Joe Alt is the only one that I would say is definitely going to be gone. Olu, Fuaga, Fotanu, JC Latham, all those guys, at least 3 of them are going to be, at least 2 of them are going to be available. Most likely 3 of them, and perhaps all 4. So it might even just be the best player available. But you have the opportunity to bring him in. They get to sit behind one of the best offensive tackles in NFL history, a future Hall of Famer, and potentially compete at right tackle and then slide in if/when Tyron goes down. And, some of those guys, it's they have guard versatility. So maybe it's you have another guy in the line, an AVT, who has plenty of injury issues as well, or maybe John Simpson isn't playing. If you take an offensive lineman at 10, because I saw some of this on Twitter, it was it's a wasted pick to pick for 2025. It's that guy will 100% play. And I don't understand this thinking with Jets fans, especially after last year, where we saw the worst case scenario happen right off the bat. The Jets really have to prepare for the worst. They have to prepare for the worst case scenario. And for me, it's it's that offensive line, which you said has the potential to be a top 10 unit, perhaps even a top 5 unit, getting decimated with injuries, and then all of a sudden you're back out to having Max Mitchell out there with Wes Schweitzer and Carter Warren. It's no. Do you want to have a great offensive line or not? Because you look around the league and you see the Philadelphia Eagles, you see Dallas Cowboys, you see the Baltimore, they're constantly drafting and developing. They have a pipeline of young talent on the offensive line. And Joe Douglas, for all the talk about building up the trenches, hasn't really done that. Outside of, he missed on Mekhi Becton. Obviously, the injuries played a role in that, but he did pass on Tristan Wirfs. AVT's been unlucky with the injuries, but outside of that, it's been late round picks. I mean, Tippmann, second rounder, and he's been so far so good. But it's this is the draft that JD can really put his stamp on fixing the offensive line, not only just for this year, securing the depth, but it's also it is a move for the long term, because I don't think Rodgers is just playing 1 year here. I think he's playing 2, 3, and he's even said 4. Let's just say he plays 2 years. You're not going to want him to go into next year, which could be the final year of Rodgers or whatever, needing to replace 2 offensive tackles. So that's where my head is at. But again, I understand they're going to go best player available. I think a trade down is very enticing because it is a deep offensive tackle class. They can still trade down plenty of picks and get a guy who you feel good about. It's maybe they fall in love with the Brock Bowers and really try to have a dominant offense on paper. But yeah, the depth of the offensive line is going to concern me. We'll see. They'll make some other moves, but that's just where my head is at for the draft. And we'll get into
Yeah,
all of
I
those
agree.
debates and
I
discussions
agree.
of mock drafts going forward. Do you have any other thoughts on that before we get to the defensive signings and get out of here?
Yeah, I mean, quickly, like you mentioned, Philly and a couple other teams. Like immediately, what came to mind for me is a couple years ago, in 22, they drafted Cam Jenkins in the second round. Obviously, different than a top 10 pick, but he didn't start any games as rookie. Then last year, he slides in as right guard, and now Jason Kelsey retires, and he's set to be their center. So it's stuff like that that I think the teams who have really good offensive lines do a great job of, is building that pipeline and being ahead of the next hole. Like, address that hole when it comes up. Get someone now who you can develop, and once the hole arises, you already have a solution on your team. I think that's the key to being a great offensive line. So, and even like the first round pick that they draft, and I put out like a tweet about this that kind of broke it down. You're not redshirting him with Tyron Smith on your team. The guy who you draft at tackle, or whoever your backup swing tackle is, that guy you should expect to play about a quarter of your offensive snaps this year. And last year, the Jets took Will McDonald with the 15th pick, and he only played 19% of the defensive snaps in the games that he played. Year before that, Jermaine Johnson, I think it was 34%. So if you draft a tackle and you assume Tyron Smith is going to miss 4 games, maybe Morgan Moses misses a couple games because he was out. He had some injuries last year as well. This guy's going to play. It's very likely. And if he doesn't, you had an amazing year of luck. You're probably winning the Super Bowl anyway, so who cares? So, but probably they're going to get hurt and you're going to need some help. So you're assuming he's going to play. So it's not a total waste of a pick, I think, compared to what a lot of first round picks end up playing, which is, year one, they're in a rotational role, whether you're talking about a defensive guy or a receiver, even quarterbacks. So I do not think it's a waste of a pick at all to take an offensive lineman here. I know when they signed Tyron Smith, you complete the starting lineup. It's like, okay, now we're going receiver, and you still need that third receiver after you get Mike Williams. It makes it an easy pick to look at, but offensive line is still very much in the mix there.
Well, yeah, and then I guess here's what I would say. The other thing about receiver, yes, they could draft one round 3, but also it's like, hey, they still have money to work with here. Obviously, their cap space right now is probably at a 0, but it's like you look at Quentin Williams that can convert. I think we did I'll pull up the article we did, or the doc we made for our free agency preview, but they can turn a lot of his salary into a bonus, and I think free up 10 million from that. They can extend DJ Reed, John Franklin Myers, another guy that they can restructure. Quincy, they can turn into a bonus. So they have some money to move around here. Not that I think all their big time spending is done, but it's like, hey, if Corey Davis is going to cost $5 million on a 1-year deal, it's like I would do that. I'd bring Corey Davis in, and then receiver is much less of a pressing need at all. I think the thing for me is very clear. When you have a 40-year-old Hall of Fame quarterback coming off an Achilles injury, the number one thing is giving him time, and keeping him healthy and keeping him upright. And Tyron Smith, you've done that, but the injuries are going to happen. At some point, the Jets are going to hit their 4th or 5th different offensive line combination because it happens every single season. And I would like it to, fortify the line as much as possible while securing the unit's future. That's just me, but again, it'll be best player available. If they fall in love with Brock Bowers, or if one of these receivers falls that they really like, you never know. But I guess I'll touch on this before we get to some of the defense. Actually, we'll wrap up with the defense, and then we'll do what else that they could do in free agency and get out of here. They haven't done too many moves on the defensive side of the ball. We're still waiting there's a couple re-signings. I guess the main one that pops out to me is Ashton Davis, still unsigned. You'd imagine he probably has some interest elsewhere, and they're in maybe a small bidding war for him because of his role as a special teamer and as a third safety. But they haven't brought him back yet. They did bring back Chuck Clark. The 2 defensive tackle signings. I know the Kinlaw contract was a little absurd. There was the story about that the Jets wanted to bring back Quentin Jefferson, that Kinlaw wasn't just a replacement for him, but they didn't answer the phone in time or something along those lines. So what do you make of some of the defensive additions that the Jets have made on the line? And obviously there's going to be a fall off from losing both Jefferson and Huff, but you're hoping that, Kinlaw can continue the upswing that he was on last year, and that a guy in Will McDonald can develop. But specifically with the defensive tackles, how do you feel, the new room looks compared to last year?
Yeah, I think the Kinlaw signing is not a good one to me. Regardless, I still think this is an A+ offseason, maybe dragged down to A because of this one. And plus the Bryce Huff, maybe mishandling that situation. I'm not saying not re-signing him, but just the lack
Yeah,
of
didn't
trading
didn't
him
trade
earlier,
him.
or
Yeah,
the many other things they could have done. So maybe an A off season because of the Kinlaw signing plus Huff. But yeah, I think I like his fit. Like, I'm not saying he's not going to make an impact here or isn't a player who could help your team, because he was a good rotational pass rusher last year. It's just he definitely did not play to a $7 million level, and we still don't know what Quentin Jefferson got. I haven't seen the details reported on that. But even if the price were equal on them, Quentin Jefferson was a lot better last year. So it feels like there's going to be a downgrade there if they expect Kinlaw to step right into Jefferson's role. And then behind him, Solomon Thomas comes back, which I think is a good move. He was improved last year. I thought he did an okay job. But an interesting guys, the nose tackle they signed, or maybe not nose tackle, but run stuffing tackle. And I want to get the pronunciation right, but we'll just call him Fotu for now, right? Leaky Fotu.
you notice I
Leaky Fotu.
completely avoided trying to say his name. I was just like the other defensive tackle. I
The
don't know.
defensive signings that they made.
Yeah, I
We'll
guess
look that up.
Lecky
Fotu, that's
Fotu,
got to be right. That's got
Lecky
first name I'm
Fotu.
questionable on, but anyway, I mean, he is definitely
Oh,
going to fill that Al Woods
wait,
role.
he's
Yeah.
George Fotu. His Lecky is like a.
Oh,
It says George and then Lecky and quotes.
so we'll call
So
him George.
yeah. Okay,
But
George
he's
Fotu.
definitely going to fill that Al Woods role. I mean, you look at the build, 334 pounds. You look at his role, consistently plays more snaps against the run than the pass. So he's going to step into that. But I'm a little curious in terms of like his actual talent level, because I remember looking for potential fits for that role for free agency and trying to make a list of guys I could target. And I do remember seeing him, and I made an article about it that listed a couple guys, and I didn't include him because his numbers were not that impressive. So I didn't think there was a way to actually sell it as like, here's why you should want this guy. So I overlooked him. And then looking at his film, and Joe Blewett watched more than me. I watched one game against the Niners, but he was not impressed with him and said he does not do as good of a job against the run in terms of like eating space, plugging gaps as you would think. And I do remember seeing that in the Niners game I watched from him. For 334 pounds, he does not hold ground like that. I do think he had, like, compared to Al Woods, I think maybe a little more technique and moves in terms of shedding blocks and making plays in the run game. But yeah, he did not seem to be as much of a, gap eater in the way that Al Woods was, in terms of his ability to just anchor down. I'm going to eat this space and, clog up the running lanes. So I think he might be a slight downgrade to Woods. Not that Woods was amazing, but I thought he did a decent job in his run stopping role. So overall, I think the interior defensive line is probably going to be slightly downgraded. But the good thing is you do have Quinnen Williams, and with the attention he demands, it makes it a lot easier for everyone else. And you can get the absolute most out of whatever they do have to offer because of Quinnen Williams and the attention he demands. And then on his own, he does so much damage that it covers up for other weaknesses. So I do think this interior is going to be a little bit worse, but it's not severe. But yeah, I do think it downgraded.
Well, and it's something that they might add more in the draft. I mean, I wouldn't put it past the
Yeah,
Jets,
potential
especially
day 3.
with they have a I don't want to say surplus, but they have a number of day 3 picks, and I think they can definitely pick up somebody in on day 3 that can give you production year 1. The other guy that they had on the defensive side of the ball, and I realized we forgot about Tyron Taylor, so we'll circle back. But Isaiah Oliver, before free agency even happened, any thoughts on how? I didn't realize it was a $2.5 million deal, which I guess is more than I thought, just because he signed before free agency. I kind of just thought he was a complete scrub, but then you look into him, it's like, all right, well, he played under Ulbrich, he played in San Francisco as well, so he knows the system. He's a Bryce Hall replacement. Has played inside and out. I don't know anything really beyond that, but I don't know how you feel about the Isaiah Oliver addition. Certainly the least acclaimed signing that the Jets made.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any super deep thoughts. I haven't looked into him too much, but I know he has starting experience when Ulbrich was with the Falcons. There were a couple seasons in a row when he was a starter for them. Then played with the Niners last year. So, he's experienced in the scheme. He's started games. Very much a Bryce Hall replacement, someone who has started but clearly isn't good enough to hold down a starting job, but that makes him a high-end backup. And he can also play some special teams. I know they haven't re-signed Justin Hardy yet. He has a lot of special teams experience in his career, so he could probably fill into that as well.
All right, back to Tyrod because we forgot about him on the offensive side of the ball. But a big complaint for the last, I guess at this point, 12 months has been the Jets not signing a veteran backup quarterback. They finally do in Tyrod Taylor, a guy who, I guess this is a common theme, has plenty of injury issues. But I think back-to-back years it's been against the Jets though that he's gotten hurt, right? So maybe now that he's on the Jets, as long as he doesn't get hurt in practice, he should be okay. That red contact jersey will save him. But about as when healthy, which I think, Ken, you could say for a lot of these guys, is about as good as it gets for a QB2, especially when you look at some of the throws that he was making. And I did watch his game against the Bills. And, I mean, you see some throws that are off the charts that make you think, like, why is this guy not starting? And then it's like, obviously the injury issues and he's one of those guys that can get hot and put together a couple of good games in a row and then have a clunker. You forget that he was the starting quarterback against the Jets in that vaunted Kembrell Tompkins drop game in 2015. Yeah. So finally, I think he's done the entire New York circuit. He has Buffalo, the Giants. Now he's here with the Jets. I like this fit because I think that the main thing that we saw last year when Rodgers went down is that they didn't really have much of a backup plan, and that Rodgers is the whole offense. I mean, he's going to get to the line and change from everything from the protection to the routes that his receivers are running. It's a lot of audibles. It's Rodgers is in full control. And when he went down early and you're forced to throw Zach Wilson out there, now it's the Todd Downing, Nathaniel Hackett show, trying to make it work for a young, struggling quarterback. I like that they have a guy who can create a lot in his own. Not only is he a veteran and he's going to see things that Zach Wilson obviously wasn't seeing, but he's a guy that can create, when the play breaks down. And he can go out there and ball. And I have to say his deep ball is still there. I was watching in that Buffalo game. You definitely see it. It's like, man, this guy, I mean, he has some of the prettiest throws that I think you'll see around the league for QB2. I mean, I think the one concern with Tyrod is just, it's like, all right, if Rodgers goes down and Tyrod's out there, it's like a ticking clock as to when does QB3 hit the field. At least that's just what it's felt like the last couple of years of Tyrod. But what did you make of that signing?
I have a question for you. Other than Aaron Rodgers, who was the last Jets quarterback who's better than Tyrod Taylor? I mean, do you put McCown and Fitzpatrick above him? He did sweep Fitzpatrick in 2015. So there was that. And as good as Fitzpatrick was that year, that was probably his best season as a starter. It's tough, but either way, the point is the Jets now have a back better than anyone they've been starting, at least since Fitzpatrick's 2015 season, right?
Yeah, I would say I was maybe going to lean towards McCown. No, I was maybe going to lean McCown 2017, but I think you're probably right. I think it's probably Fitzpatrick 2015 and then Tyrod. But yeah, no, at the very least, yeah, he's a guy that if he's the Jets starting quarterback last year, they win more than 7 games.
They win a couple more games.
They absolutely win a couple more games. I think they beat the Pats. Who else do they win? With Tyron as the starting quarterback, who did they beat last year? They definitely beat the Pats in week 3. I kind of want to say the Raiders, although I don't actually think Zach was all that bad in that game. He just kind of,
we'll leave that one. I do think Zach Wilson was kind of, I don't want to say good, but not close to the top of the reasons they lost. So we'll give them the Patriots for sure. I'm looking at the schedule right now. Try to help me figure this out. But Falcons was an 8-13 loss. That's one you can maybe give them.
That's
probably those 2. I think that's 2. If we're not going to give them the Raiders, that was the only other close loss. Oh, there was the Chiefs, but Zach Wilson played really well in that one. So we'll say he gives them 2 more if he played. And I think for a backup quarterback, that's a good place to be. So, yeah, I mean, coming into the offseason, there was only a few guys, free agents, who I thought if that guy, I'd be like, that's a great get. And I think it was Brissett. Brissett was probably my favorite. Minshew, but, Minshew signed for basically low-end starter money with the Raiders, kind of like, bridge quarterback money. And then I think Tyrod was in there. Other than that, I think everyone else was, maybe solid, but they all had their share of question marks, and Tyrod does too. But when you're talking about guys like Tannehill, it's like Tyrod is old too, but Tannehill really struggled last year. That's injuries. Tyrod's had injuries too. Bottom line, Tannehill is like, he really wasn't good last year. Tyrod was, for that situation with the Giants, he was pretty good. He was way outperformed what DeVito and Jones did in the same offense. And he had the Giants looking really competitive when he was playing. So, yeah, he was definitely one of the few guys who I thought if the Jets got him, that is a backup quarterback you feel really good about, a high-end backup, and he does that. And there's a few different things I like about his game. Number one, he protects the ball really well in terms of interceptions. He does fumble sometimes, so not the greatest in that area, but purely, actually, even his fumbles are low. Now they pull up his fumbles. Generally, he's been pretty low with fumbles. But yeah, the interceptions, he had 5 touchdowns and 3 picks last year for his career. Only 1.7% of his passes have been intercepted. So he's always been a very risk-averse kind of game manager type. But then, like you said, every now and then he'll pull out this beautiful rainbow deep ball that he's always had in his arsenal. So I really like that combination for a backup quarterback. For the most part, he'll protect the ball. He'll play it safe. He's not going to do anything crazy. And yeah, he's limited. He's not going to read the field like Rodgers or attack tight windows or attack the middle of the field. So it's going to be hard to be an explosive offense with him out there, but he's not going to make the big turnover. And every now and then he can hit that deep ball just to sprinkle it in there. So I think he is a very ideal backup quarterback when healthy.
All right. Last thing before we get out of here, what other moves do you think the Jets will make this week? They have Jadeveon Clowney visiting this week to add some depth to that defensive line. I mean, I think it allows them to not fully bank on Will McDonald. It also could maybe give them some versatility with John Franklin Myers, so they could free up a lot of space if they were to move him, especially if it's after June 1st. But I think it's just, we know that the Jets want that rotation of pass rushers. At this point, Clowney's actually more of a run stuffer. He's great in the run game, but it would just give them, replace that. Not only are they losing Bryce Huff, but they're losing Carl Lawson. So they definitely want to add an edge rusher. I didn't know if it was going to be in free agency or if they were going to do it in the draft, perhaps both. But Clowney is interesting to me. It just depends on the deal. So what do you make of Clowney? And then, yeah, when you look around, it's like, are you interested in double dipping at the free agent market, circling back to Corey Davis? Maybe Odell Beckham Jr. still wants to play with Aaron Rodgers and he'll accept a cheaper deal. Do they go and try to sign another offensive lineman to shore up not just offensive tackle, but also the interior? Because right now, Wes Schweitzer is really their only backup interior, unless you're counting, I know Max Mitchell played a game or two there and they re-signed Jake Hansen, but so they have some depth signings that can make. RB2 is up there as well behind Breece Hall, maybe another tight end. So how do you kind of see the next couple of weeks leading up to the draft? What do you kind of want to see the Jets do before we get to pick number 10?
Well, in terms of Clowney and the edge, I really don't think they can afford Clowney. Like, he had a really good year last season. I know he's known as, he hasn't lived up to his pass rush ceiling, more of a run defender, but this past year, 9.5 sacks. He had 71 pressures. That was a career high, and it was the 11th most among edge rushers. So he's kind of done this throughout his career. He's been up and down. He'll have 0 sacks and he'll have 9. But he had a huge year last year. So I do feel like he's going to get a good contract that's going to be outside the Jets' range now that they signed Mike Williams. If they were to somehow squeeze him in there, it would be very exciting. But I feel like the Jets are going to be priced out on him. But getting another edge rusher is something that I think is still on the table, especially with Bryce Huff being gone, a pass rush specialist. And there are some good options there. Yannick Ngakoue is like the kind of one of the best known players in that type of role. As a guy who's not a run defender, but he can just explode off the line, gets a pass rush. I like the idea of getting him and just playing him in the 2022 Bryce Huff role where it's just strictly pass plays, pin your ears back, go bend around the corner, make some noise. I like him for that role. Romeo Okwara is another guy who can do that, pass rush-centric player. So I could see them doing something like that in the edge, just a veteran pass rush type player who's there for passing downs. Running
I think Okwara just retired, by the way.
Did he? Okay, so take him off the board. But
Like
I know Ngakoue is still out there. Speaking of him, I remember in the 2021 free agency, if you remember, it was kind of him and Carl, and Trey Hendrickson was up there. It was really those 3 guys we were talking about for the Jets targeting on the edge, and Hendrickson's been a home run for the Bengals. And Lawson's, flamed out with the Jets, and then Okora, as you mentioned, just retired. So Jets missed out on that one, but they're going to try to turn around with some additions. But I mean, what do you think in terms of running back? Do you think they'll sign a veteran before the draft, or maybe just stick with Izzy and we'll add a day 3 guy?
I definitely think they're going to sign a running back. It's just whether or not they do it before the draft. I'm trying to think of what level of running back they're going to go after. I mean, I thought AJ Dillon was a guy that they would be interested in, but he re-signed with Green Bay. I'm trying to look at the list right here. I mean,
Damian Harris is a guy I brought up because he played
yeah,
in a gap scheme in New England for quite a few years and was pretty good. So he's someone I have my eye on.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Zeke Elliott, Cordero Patterson. J.K. Dobbins, Rogers' buddy. Yeah, I don't really. I mean, I guess I mean, Damian Harris out of all those guys you mentioned is probably the best choice. I mean, maybe Clyde Edwards-Helaire would be kind of interesting, but I'd have to look into him a little bit more. I know Zeke was all right for New England, but yeah, I mean, out of that list, it's not the most inspiring list, But I don't know. I definitely think that with running back, I mean, you see with Izzy Abanikanda, who was was he a 5th round pick or a 4th round pick?
5th, I believe.
He was a 5th round pick. So it's like, yeah, I think they could again take a running back day 3. And a lot of teams have success just throwing him out there, but you do forget there are a lot of intricacies to being a running back in the NFL, from pass blocking to receiving. I just think that with, you saw with the Abanikanda, it's like he's a great college player and we'll see if he can make that jump, but it's not necessarily like he was ready day 1 to be out there. Maybe there are more draft ready guy or day 1 ready guys to get in the draft and less of a high ceiling guy, but more of a high floor. Maybe they use one of their late round picks on that type of running back, but yeah, it's not the most inspiring group. I think the switch to the gap system takes some of the pressure off of the running back, is at least how I kind of see it. I think with the zone blocking scheme, it's kind of like you put that pressure on the running back to get horizontal and then read the hole and pick the right lane. And I think that was something that you saw Abanikanda, at times he kind of struggled with. It wasn't like he had the best blocking.
Yeah.
So I think you could take a higher floor, maybe a more pro ready type of running back in the 5th or 6th round and put him in that role as well. But then it's just like if Breece Hall goes down, you better hope Abanikanda or that other rookie's ready. So, but I don't know if we see that signing happen until after the draft. I think they'll wait on the draft for that one. For me, it really comes down. The one that I keep thinking about is receiver. But I think Corey Davis could be in the Jets price range of a guy who won't be too expensive. He might be able to sign a 1-year, $5 million deal, and I think he would be a nice way to kind of round out this Jets receiver trio. And I don't know if you include Lazard in that, but just because I think, if Williams was to go down, or even if Garrett was to go down, you want somebody else on the outside, and it gives them a lot of slot versatility too with Garrett Wilson. If they were to bring in Corey Davis, I mean, look, they might just pencil Allen Lazard into that role. He is getting $11 million this year. It should be his last year with the Jets. So maybe they just see Allen Lazard as that, and they can go into the draft and take somebody round 3 or round 4 or whatever. But just for the depth of the unit, because God forbid Garrett Wilson goes down, or a guy, Mike Williams, who has some injury issues, or it's like, I don't want to be out there week 14 fighting for the playoffs and we got Jason Brownlee and Irvin Charles out there, I think the depth of the unit needs at least one more body, maybe even 2. And I'd be interested in Corey Davis. That's kind of the one free agent signing that I have kind of left on my mind, but I agree with you on edge. I think Clowney's probably going to price himself out of the Jets, just especially after getting both Tyron and Mike Williams. But I like the Ngakoue idea. I'd have to look into some of the other guys, but overall, I don't think any Jets fan at this point can complain about the job that Joe Douglas has done and the way that he set them up for the draft. Just being able to plug all these holes. Yes, the defense is going to get a little bit worse, you'd imagine. We'll see what other moves they make. But hey, maybe Will McDonald takes that Jermaine Johnson type of leap and you don't really see too much of a fall off. But if they're able to this offense on paper, stacked with the defense that the Jets have had the last 2 years, is unequivocally a playoff football team. And it's just a matter of health. It's just a matter of health from quarterback to left tackle to receiver 2 and to everything in between. If they're able to stay healthy, Michael, this is the best Jets team I've seen on paper since, 2010 probably. probably 2010. After that big
It's probably
offseason.
even
And
better
even
than
then,
that,
it's
really.
probably even better than that, but I just don't want to put it above that because we haven't seen him play a game yet.
Right.
And Rodgers coming off an Achilles, Tyron Smith played 13 games, Mike Williams played 3. There's a lot of variables here, but on paper, this is the best Jets team since I've been watching. And I know we said the same thing last year, but this one blows it out of the water, like you said. I mean, especially when you look at the offensive line difference. So I think a tip of the cap to Joe Douglas. The Jets once again, offseason champions, and now we get to turn ahead to the draft, Michael, which is always a fun time of the year, especially when you don't have to necessarily go shopping for needs. I think the Jets right now are in a great spot, although I definitely would still like to see them take an offensive tackle. So I think we can get out of here. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add. But you can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter, Michael _ Nania, myself, Ben W. Blessington. Go to jetsxfactor.com. Best place to go for Jets content. Check out the JetX YouTube. Check out some of the other JetX pods. I think that's it. Michael, last thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm proud of Joe Douglas and company. I think I've been very critical of this regime over the past few months. Really, ever since Aaron Rodgers' injury, anything post that, I think I've been very critical of the whole franchise, organization, all the decision makers, and I still believe most of it, if not all of it, was warranted. But this past week, I think they answered a lot of the questions I had about them, because I think, and I said this earlier in the podcast, but like I think one of my biggest concerns was it really felt like the organization has been so attached to Rodgers and just married to this idea that he's going to just save them all and that they don't have to do much of anything and that there was no accountability necessary for last season. But with these moves, especially like you restructure all these contracts, sign backloaded deals, you get these injury prone but high upside players, it's given off that all in mentality. Like, we're not going to settle for who we are. We're not going to settle for last season plus Aaron Rodgers. We're going to do the best we can to get the most out of what we have. And I really think that's the vibe that they've given off with these, especially these past 2 signings, but overall the past week. I love the way that they attacked offensive line and backup quarterback, their 2 biggest issues last season. And they took it seriously. They didn't just settle. They made great moves that are cost effective, but also upgrade the team. So, yeah, I love the way that they are taking this offseason seriously and just showing you that all-in mentality. So there's still a lot to prove, as you said. Got to stay healthy. Nathaniel Hackett's still the offensive coordinator. Robert Saleh's still got a lot to prove as the head coach. But, I mean, the talent is there. The talent is, like you said, it's kind of hard to compare to those 2009, 2010 teams because obviously they got so far in the playoffs. And, they didn't even have the quarterback. So imagine how many games they could have won. Well, they could have done the playoffs if they did. So it's kind of hard to make that comparison. And I know that team also, like, they kind of outplayed their on paper talent. Like, they were really good, but they didn't, like, because of the coaching and the scheme, it feels like, look at their defense, for example. They didn't have the pass rushers the Jets have
No.
up front, but they still got that production because of the blitzing and the scheme and the coverage that they had. Then you look at the offense, like, they had good weapons, but they didn't have Brees Hall and Garrett Wilson, but
Hey,
they were still good enough,
Sean Green,
to score
LT.
points. They're not Brees Hall, not
All right.
LT at that stage, obviously, but
Yeah, that's true.
but yeah, it's hard to make that
Sean Green in
comparison.
the
But
playoffs
like,
was kind of unreal, though.
he was a beast.
At least
I know I didn't watch, but like, I've seen highlights, the stats, and everything. He was a beast. Hopefully, Brees can do the same once he gets to the playoffs. But yeah, on paper, this is by far the best team they've had since I started watching. At the very least, since like 2011. And we know football isn't played on paper. Got to stay healthy. You got to coach well. Scheme's got to work. There's got to be camaraderie and chemistry. Lots and lots of variables. But man, you look at this team right now. We know they have the defense. And yes, maybe it'll get a little bit worse. But with the blue chips they have, Sauce, Quinnen, Quincy Williams, Mosley's back, Reed, Carter, like, they're still loaded on defense. It's going to be a great defense. And this offense, Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson, Brees Hall, Mike Williams, Tyron Smith, Elijah Vera Tucker, like, it's just loaded, this roster. You got your special teams duo back, Thomas Morstead and Greg Zuerlein. Like this team is ready to go, man. It's just health. It's just health.
It's just health. It's just Nathaniel Hackett and that MetLife turf.
Nathaniel
And
Hackett and the MetLife turf.
that's really
But
the only thing
hopefully
that's
with
standing
Rodgers
between
there,
them.
Hackett is just negated. You know,
That's true.
that's kind of the
Well,
hope.
okay, here's one more question before we get out of here. This is a very important question, Michael. What exactly do the Jets beat writers do? Do you
That
know?
is
Do you have any idea what they actually do outside of training camp stat watching and
how many
stirring the
reports
pot?
do they get wrong? Or like they said, like I don't. Or
They
didn't
haven't
they
broken
say?
a single
Was it? Didn't
story.
one of them say they weren't going to target Mike Williams because they had Lazard?
They literally I don't I God no. I saw I won't we don't have to name names here, but I saw a number
Oh,
of
Corey
there was a beat
Davis.
reporter who said
That was what it
that they're
was.
gonna be there was a beat reporter saying they're not gonna spend big. There was another beat reporter saying like it's more likely that they're not going to get Tyron Smith, Mike Williams, and
Yeah,
Tyler.
don't
The way
expect
that
the
he
Jets to
worded it
spend
was,
big.
yeah, it's just like, and then it's just like the job is them literally just quote tweeting whatever gets tweeted out by another national reporter or the team account and just saying, oh, the Jets picked up, the Jets get their receiver number 2. It's like that's the job, and then you spend half of training camp complaining about having to be have a preseason complaining about having to be at the game in the fourth quarter. It's like I don't understand. I mean, you could go to Jets X Factor or any of the other Jets websites and read better articles, more researched, well-founded, more interesting articles than you're going to get at these bigger publications. And it's not even like these guys at this point have any scoops. I mean, they get fed little transactional news every once in a while, but even those reports seems like that any of the signings go to big and national reporters. The only reports that they ever break are like tiny little transactional news, little tidbits, and a lot of times that doesn't even get sourced to get leaked to one of the beat reporters. I mean, it's like just 2 months ago we had a big article from the Athletic with 30 Jet sources, and I don't think the Athletic broke a single story about the Jets. So it's like, who are those 30 people in the building? Your
Yeah.
sources. It's just like I don't know. Not to go on a tangent here, but it's like, what do they even do? It's the only time they're valuable is during training camp when they can tweet out the quarterback stats. That's it. I mean, that's really it. So anyway, I don't want to burn any bridges for you. I know you go to practice sometimes. You're with the media, so this is solely my opinions. They're not necessarily represented by Michael Nania, but I have no idea what the Jets beat
I
is
agree.
doing. To this
I
point.
agree with everything you said. I
It's
have nothing to add.
tragic.
I agree.
All right, I guess that's it. Well, I don't
Also,
know.
before we get out of here, we got to talk about NYJ Matt and the Taylor ham, egg, and cheese for Mike Williams. I mean,
I know.
what a legend, right?
That
The
I
way
mean,
the
that
way
is
the whole
the
thing
fact
played
that
out
that's.
was just
I mean, it's on
that is
Sports
wild.
Center.
Yeah,
Schefter's tweeting about it. Mike Williams putting it on his Instagram story. I mean, that guy is just a Twitter master. Yeah, it was really cool. It should have been a bacon, egg, and cheese, but whatever. That's fine. I don't think I've ever had a Taylor ham. I mean, if I'm gonna out myself as never living in
me neither.
Jersey, I have lived in New York before, but that was bacon, egg, and cheese, not. But whatever. I'll try it next time I'm out there. All right. Let's get out of here, Michael. It was a good week. It's a very good week. Tyron Smith, Mike Williams, rehauled the offensive line, made some other defensive moves, but who cares about that? We'll see what else happens. We get to fully turn our attention towards the NFL draft, which is very exciting. Make sure to check out our interview with Thomas Morstead that dropped on Friday. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll be back next Monday. Go Jets.